Okay. Hello, and good to be back this week. Thank you for joining me. It's always fun to speak about our favorite topic of languages. So this week, actually, the idea came from someone who wrote to me and just said, how do I actually learn languages? Because I think sometimes we have a tendency of talking about things in a way, sort of, how to remember certain things, but how do you actually start and how do you learn a language? It felt like a worthy topic for discussion, and I've had a lot of feedback from many people who have written to me on social media channels, particularly from Instagram and on Twitter. And it's been quite interesting for me to see the different comments and ideas about how you learn a language. And I think I just want to sort of round them all up, put them together, and put in some of my own thoughts as well. So in terms of learning a new language, and I've done this in so many ways now through my life, and I said I just want to talk through the ways I've used, and then I'll comment on how I found them to work for me. And then also, clearly what I'm doing right now is a very specific experiment with language learning for a month. So, okay, so let's start at the beginning. When I was younger, obviously, I learned English just as my home language. That's the language I spoke growing up at home. We had elements of Welsh words in sort of just Welsh words within our English that were passed down from generations. And there were obviously dialect as well. We spoke the Scouse dialect at home too. So I had sort of standard English at school, Scouse dialect at home with Welsh mixed in with some words. And then I started learning languages at school. So like many of you, I started with school languages. I didn't grow up in a very multilingual environment. So with French, I started when I was very young. So I had it at school from a young age. And I think I just took to it because I really liked the idea of using other words to express ideas that I already had and to be able to talk to people in using different words and different grammar. And I think that was because I already enjoyed playing with that accents, and I already knew about the idea of having different words that meant the same thing. So things that I knew in Welsh growing up were the numbers, un, dau, tri, pedwar, pump, etc., going all the way up. And I knew that those were the numbers in Welsh. And I knew that things like caer drws, close the door, was Welsh. And so I knew that these words had basically were from another language. So I grew up with this idea of knowing that this was a thing. And going on holiday as well, when I was younger, we would go to places like Spain where the level of English then wasn't that wasn't that high. So I would hear a lot of Spanish. I would ask people about words. I was always very, very curious. So when I got to study French at school, I was very, very excited by it. And so I was very motivated. And I sat and I learned, and I used to look at lists of vocabulary, and I used to try and learn as much as I possibly could. And then I had friendships, and I really got into the language. Now, it's possibly not the most typical story from school. And I've met many people, and also had the experience in other school environments where people have come out of classes and not succeeded in speaking the language afterwards. Even other children who were in my class didn't necessarily come out speaking French, whereas I did. And I think in part, yes, that can be to do with the teacher, but in part also it's to do with me as an individual really wanting to do something, and the people I met as well, having friends that spoke the language, going to France, using the language, hearing the language, having this why was a really important thing. And I think that's the common thread that's going to link everything, I think. So there is this class environment, and it's something that many people talk to me when they speak to me about language learning, and I always get this comment of, oh, you're very traditional, you go through the sort of the university or school and you like going to classes. And in fact, I do. I really like going to classes, and the reason I like going to classes is because I'm quite an outgoing person. I enjoy other people's company. I like to communicate. I like to talk. I like to learn from other people. I like the fact that when you start going to a class, for me, it actually becomes part of the reason why I want to go and continue with the language is the people that the community, I guess, around the language and the learning. And I find that really, really important. And I've certainly noticed that as well in other stages of my life. That's not been the only way I've learned languages. I obviously went through the school system, and went to university and studied languages at university too. So I'm very well acquainted with those kinds of systems and the very different techniques that different teachers use. Some teachers are very practical and they want you to speak. Other teachers can have more of a penchant for literature, poetry, or something that isn't necessarily something you can apply to your normal everyday conversation in the language, but it helps to give you a depth of understanding sometimes of the culture, society, literary and linguistic traditions of the country and its people and language that you're learning. So I would never poo-poo that kind of system. And when we talked about, the efficacy of sort of this structured school and how school system and how it works, what I would say is that, like every system, it won't appeal to everyone. And that's certainly true, because otherwise you would get everybody coming out speaking equally well or more or less very well the language, right, that they'd studied for 5 years at school. That doesn't happen. Around Europe, you see that a lot with, it will happen with English very often, but English is everywhere. Does it happen with every language? In my experience, not really. So the same is not true of the children that have English and then their second language French or German. They don't necessarily come out of that system speaking all of the languages to the same degree. They will come out of the English speaking it pretty well normally, mainly because English is everywhere. Now, for me, this is the thing, is where can you get the language? And so other languages that I studied have fewer materials. So you do get languages where there aren't many things that you can use to learn it. I mean, my home language, Macedonian, is one of those languages where there are just not many materials available. There certainly weren't when I learned it 17 or so years ago. There weren't really any things that you could use as one book available, and that was about it. Within the country itself, where it's even spoken, there weren't really many courses that were very structured to take you to a high level of fluency. So those kinds of things were not really an option. So I found actually just intensive solitary study, finding a language partner, practicing the language on a regular basis. That was how I learned Macedonian. It's also similar technique to what I used with German, which was an intensive many hours of study a day, using the language all the time, as much as possible, with speakers of the language, and listening to radio, TV, you name it, anything and everything I could do in those languages I did, learning songs, learning things, listening to stories, listening to things that were important to those cultures. These are all things that I did. I asked silly questions. I used to write funny notes to my now wife. So I'd write postcards and send them written in Macedonian. I used to write things in German and I'd have them checked. I do all these kinds of things to just sort of play with the language. And every single time, I think, when you get to language learning, and when we talk about language learning, and what I notice between somebody who is successful and someone who is not successful, many people have used different techniques, as I've done myself, right? The self-study and in school or in a classroom environment. the key difference between a success story and an unsuccessful story is the success story tends to really get into it. They don't miss a beat. They don't sort of put it off days at a time, all the time, consistently. They do constant, regular study. They try and use the language. They're constantly thinking about how to say things that they want to say in the language. What does this mean for you as a learner? What this means is, if you want to say certain things, you can determine the vocabulary and the sentences, the grammar yourself as to what's important. So these are things that I do now, where I try not to go down these rabbit holes of additional vocabulary that's unnecessary. So I don't learn things like the red lamb is happy because she's looking at a silver moon. That kind of thing, particularly at a very beginner level in a language, is not, first of all, it's nonsense generally. You're never going to say the red lamb is happy because she's looking at a silver moon. It's just a ridiculous thing to say. And that's just one example of many that I could think of that come up sometimes in some of these newfangled ways of learning languages. And I would say that it's probably a waste of your energy doing that kind of stuff, because you've got no practical application for those kinds of sentences. You're better off having sentences that make sense, sentences that you can actually use, sentences that you can manipulate in a way that would be something you could imagine yourself saying to a speaker of the language. Even if I switch out a lamb for a cow or for another animal, it's still as stupid as a sentence. The red cow is happy because she's looking at the silver moon. It still makes no sense. It's still ridiculous. And unfortunately, we do get taken, may not be as silly as that sentence, but sometimes we do get taken down those roads because a teacher might decide that that's what we're going to do. They may have this thing where they want you to learn all of the countries' names, all of the languages in the world. They may want to teach you all of the animals. They may want to teach you all of the colors, every single color. They may want you to learn just all the fruit, all the vegetables. You really don't need to learn all of that in the very beginning. In the very beginning, focus on what's important to you. Okay, so as a beginner in a language, what I would focus on is foods and drinks I like, and foods and drinks I'm allergic to, because they're important things to know. You're going to maybe talk about those at some point because they're important vocabulary words in your own language. Talking about you're learning about your sister and your sister's family when you don't have a sister, for example, focusing on that when you're unlikely to say it isn't potentially the best use of your time. Focus on the family members you have. You may just have a brother or two brothers. You may need to focus more if the grammar is more bent towards, how the noun changes, how the word brother changes to brothers, with the brother, of the brother, from the brother. Is there a different type of version of that word that you would need if you were going to talk about your brother? If you learn all of that for your sister and focus and split your energy between the two, and you never use it, well, you're kind of you're wasting your time a little bit in the very beginning, because you're following a path of you're not going to be able to use that vocabulary straight away. And so what you're gonna need to do is repeat and regurgitate the same things over and over again until they become automatic. That's what language learning is generally. It's learning something to the point that it is an automatic process. It comes out of your head and you almost don't even have to think about it. It's sort of, this is what I say. So when you get to other topics, you would apply the same logic. So if I were to learn, for example, and this happened to some friends of mine, some family friends, they were going to Greek classes, and the Greek teacher gave them a list of 125 country names, together with the nationalities, and for male and female, because that's important in Greek, and also the name of the language. And And they said that they had that to learn, and they were working on this for weeks. This was the focus of the lesson. And I just looked and I thought, this is crazy. You can't go into town and talk to people about basic things, but you're learning hundreds of words to do with nationalities and languages and peoples and countries that you actually have zero connection with. So for me, the important thing for me is that I learn the words of the countries, the languages that I speak, have lived in, have family in, or I'm from, or those are the sort of core things. And that's probably not going to be more than 10 or 20 different places, right? With maybe the names of the countries and whatever else. That's really all you need. I think that, you know, when we go to learn a language, you can use many techniques to do it. You just need to be able to focus in on the things that are important to you. I remember when sometimes you will come across very odd words when you learn a language, whether through the course book. They try and put as much in as possible. They're trying to cover the bases of so many people, right? So a course book is written for the general public, generally speaking. It's not written tailored for you as an individual. It's written for the general public. So therefore, they're going to include what they think is going to be the target audience and what the target audience may or may not be interested in. So they don't know whether you're from, for example, you'll see in many course books that they focus on, especially they're written in English, Australia, USA, Canada, the UK, maybe just England, maybe Scotland, Wales, Ireland. I see sometimes as well, but generally it's those countries that's written in English. They may have a few other countries that they may want to consider. They may add in Spanish and French, but they will focus the kind of attention on those kinds of markets, because when you're selling a book, you know the market that you're selling to, right? But some course books will just include a huge list because they want to try and appeal to as many people as possible. But remember, that doesn't mean that you need to memorize all of them. You can go back and learn those later if you need to, and you can see if you come across people in your normal life. That's when I tend to, for example, for me, that's when I tend to pick up these additional words, like these words for countries or nationalities or languages that maybe I've never needed to discuss. Sometimes even they're not common concepts in a certain language. So many countries don't know the word for my home country, the United Kingdom, in their language. It's not a common expression. Sadly, it's sort of just categorized as Great Britain or England sometimes by a number of languages and countries. And so when I mention the United Kingdom, they look at me and say, well, what's that? So sometimes even with your own country, it's not recognized. And so the focus is always going to be on communication, right? If you want to speak the language, you want to communicate. There are certain topics that you need to know about just because they do come up and you're going to need to ask about them or understand them. And they tend to be the common ones that you see in these sort of standard book approaches of days of the week, months of the year, telling the time, asking about the weather, talking about your health. Have you got a headache? Have you got backache? All those kinds of things. What your plans are, what you're doing, what you like to do, your hobbies, talking about your family, talking about your house, the rooms in the house. Now, there are certain aspects of these, like, for example, I can tell you right away that for an exam, I would very often have to talk about my house. So exams will often, that was my topic of conversation for my oral exam in Cornish, was to talk about my house and to talk about how many rooms there are, what the rooms are called, what's in them, what's in the garden, what I do at the house, why I like the house, where the house is situated, all those kinds of things. Now, I can guarantee you that in my normal day-to-day life, I very rarely have to talk about my house and the inside of my house, the contents of my house in such detail. The reason is that if you think about it, when you go around, a country, even as a tourist, what do you really need to be able to do in the beginning? Well, you do need the directions that they teach you. You do need to maybe mention, oh, the weather, it's hot today, to make some small talk. Do you really need to know all the intricate details of mist, fog, hail, all of this kind of stuff, unless it's really typical of the country that you're in? Focus on that. Talking about the snow in Arabic, for example, is a bit crazy if you land in Dubai and you think you're going to be talking about snow. These are the kinds of things that I tend to do, is focus on this. Now, the SpeakerE app that I've been using for Estonian, this is exactly what it does. It takes the most commonly used phrases, words, and it basically puts the words together in the app itself and surrounds it with sentences that you would say. And that encapsulates the grammar of the language. So when you learn these sentences and you're tested on them in the app constantly, you get a feeling for how the grammar is going to work. And what you tend to do then, and what I do, is when you play with the language, speaking with somebody or thinking about it, is you start to switch out some of the words and see if you can use other words to create, using the same sentence structures to create a different meaning. And really, that's all language is. So, these ideas, when you hear people talking about learn like a child, well, in a way, yes, there's some aspect of learning like a child that makes sense. The thing that makes sense with learning like a child is playing with the language. A child will play with a language until they get it right, until they're understood. They will play with the language endlessly. And I speak from experience. I remember doing it myself as a child, but also I've witnessed this firsthand of children speaking, including my own daughter. And they will play, they will get it wrong. They're fearless. They don't care if they get it wrong. You learn from your mistakes, and they know that. They understand that, because as adults, we kind of tend to forget that we learned a lot from our mistakes and from playing and from experimenting and from trying to get it right. Children don't have that psychological barrier that's gone up. They just kind of just get on with it. So you give them a bit of information, you've repeated it, they repeat it back, they insert words, change words in and out. They try and extrapolate rules. So, this is why you get children saying things like, oh, I seed it instead of I saw it. Because they know that I talked, I watched, I seed. So they add the D at the end in English when they're very small, because they understand that that's the rule. And basically all I do as an adult is a very similar thing to what kids do anyway. I try and extrapolate rules. And this works for a number of reasons. It may not always be immediately obvious to the speaker of the language what I'm saying. I may not have made the guess completely right. However, big however, if I'm using a similar structure and just changing the word out, even if I've made a mistake in the declension, there may be something a bit different. 9 times out of 10 with my Estonian teacher, she has understood what I'm trying to do and corrected me. So because I've used the right ending and I've used the beginning she understands, the bit in the middle that may change a little bit, actually, when I put it together, she gets what I'm doing. And so this strategy is not a bad strategy to adopt. In fact, this playfulness with language is something that will actually help you to happen upon meanings. You will just find these meanings of things that you've never even imagined, right? So I remember when I first came to Skopje, and I was playing around with the word haide, which is like, it can mean lots of things, but it can mean like let's. And so I was playing with it because it can go with a lot of things, right? Haide doodime, let's go. Haide whatever you want to do. And I was playing with it with words I'd learned, and I used the word for fog, magla, and I went haide magla. And my wife looked at me. She was like so shocked. She said, "Where did you learn that?" I I said, I didn't. I'm just playing with the language. But aydınmak actually means like make like fog, like just disappear. It's like telling someone to get lost in Macedonian. And I didn't know it meant that, but because I played with it, I just started laughing because I find it hilarious when I stumble upon words and phrases that I didn't know existed, but I thought I made them up, right? And these are the things that I do constantly. And I do this with Estonian right now. So I am now on day 18, I think it's 18, yeah. I've done 17 days of Estonian. And what I do is I go through the SpeakerE app. What I like about it is the sentences are sentences I can imagine myself saying, first of all. I do sometimes feel frustration when I learn a day of the week and I don't see the other days of the week, but I think that's my learned thing of, I'm used to the school system where when you learn the days of the week, you learn the days of the week. Whereas in Estonian, I learned the word for Wednesday first. And I didn't quite get it. But then I remember Oit saying to me, actually, there are some days of the week that are more commonly used than others, strangely enough. So I learned this word for Wednesday, which is kolmapäev, which is like literally 3 day in English. Kolm is 3, päev is day. So I learned this word kolmapäev. And I tried to extrapolate what the other days of the week would be based on that, because Portuguese works in a similar way. Segunda-feira, terça-feira, quarta-feira, sexta-feira, etc., etc., etc. And there are a number of languages that do this. Chinese does it. Chinese is 星期一, 星期二, 星期三, 星期 what, and so it goes, right? And you learn this. It does it in Korean as well. First day, second day, third day, fourth day. And I thought it would be the same, but it isn't. In Estonian, some of them are like that, and some of them are not. So I found out later that they're not all like that. But what does make sense is that the types of vocabulary that I'm learning and the types of sentence structures that I'm learning contain sometimes base words that then later I will see in elements of other words. And so it makes it easier to remember them. The other thing that they do, which I think is very clever, is the things that I'm not always given a full translation of, that are just sort of listening exercises, will contain words that I don't know, but enough of the ones that I do know so I don't feel completely lost. And then what I find is that later on, the words that they've used before, I will have had them repeated a few times. And then when I get to learn them in the actual app later, they feel more familiar to me. So I've had this with words that I've just picked up because I've seen them so many times now on the app, and that's been really, really useful. So it's very odd to sort of do 2 and a bit weeks of a language and sort of be at, well, however many words I'm at now, nearly 700 words or so. It feels a bit weird to have gone through so many things like that. And sort of in terms of where I would be on this sort of the CEFR scale, roughly with that kind of word count would be around about an A1 level. Do I feel like I'm at an A1 level? Yeah, very difficult to say. In a way, yes, and in a way, no. There are weird things that happen when you learn a language so intensively. You can almost feel like you've just sort of, your brain's going to explode, right? And you're so focused on it. And this is sort of where it comes to as well. What happens when you learn a language for years, months, weeks, hours? Where is the difference there? And this is sort of something that's coming out, and I think I will talk more about that after I've done the month of Estonian, to talk a little bit more about how I feel about the whole, how that sort of works. But just to give you an idea of something that I think is important to tell you, this past year and a half, when sort of COVID hit and the pandemic was in full swing and there were lockdowns all across the world and couldn't go traveling anywhere, couldn't really do anything, I had started learning Persian, which I've always wanted to learn. I think it's a great language, really well, sort of a nice bridge language for me in terms of it's had a great impact on a number of languages I've already studied, and I would love to learn it. And I've got some great Iranian friends that that I would love to be able to sort of know more about their language and culture through learning language. But I recognize also that Persian is not going anywhere, and so I decided to leave Persian on one side. And I decided that I would take advantage of all of these opportunities to learn languages I wouldn't normally get to study. And so it started with the course in North Sami. I then had, which lasted 3 months. I then did a 3-week intensive course in Scots, which I loved. And then I started some academic year. So September last year, I decided to do an academic year of a few languages. And I chose languages from the island where I'm from. So I chose Scottish Gaelic and Cornish. And I've been doing those languages now for 9 months, I guess. So September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. Yeah, June, July. So 9-10 months, right? So that's quite a chunk of time to be learning a language. And bearing in mind these are Celtic languages and I already speak Welsh, I thought that I would have a really easy ride of it, and that I wouldn't need to do very much work at all. I was wrong. So with Cornish, I definitely had an easier ride of it because it's much more closely related to Welsh than Gaelic because it's Brythonic and not Goidelic. So it was the right side of the Celtic language family for me to have a lot of free words and for the grammar to be more comparable to what I'm used to from Welsh. Although all the Celtic languages have a number of things in common. Now, when I started the courses, at the same time, I had an hour and a half of Gaelic a week, but only an hour of Cornish. My Gaelic teacher focused a lot on Gaelic poetry, spent a lot of time talking about the literary sort of heritage of the language. And I loved doing it because I thought it was really interesting. But not so much focus on learning to speak the language actively. The Cornish class was the exact opposite. It was very much focused on, we need to get you speaking the language. If you want, you can then do the grade 1 exam. And I did. And so by the end of that, it ended up being, I went to an online intensive weekend of Cornish. I met people in the Cornish language community. I started using the language twice a week at online conversation groups and also doing my class. Gaelic doesn't really have that kind of thing going on in the same way. If you know of something and I've missed it, please do let me know. But I've not found anything like that for Gaelic. And so with Gaelic, it's just kind of plodded on for the year. So yeah, I've done a year of Gaelic and I've done a year of Cornish. After a year of Cornish, I would say that my Cornish is around about an A2 level, which I think is a fairly good achievement for a year of Cornish. I feel quite comfortable talking about what I'm doing, who I am, where I'm from, my family, my plans. I can understand quite a lot of stuff when people talk to me as well. It's definitely not, I'm not perfect at all, and far from it, but I can have a meaningful conversation that's not just sort of broken language, which is quite nice. It's not, as I say, it's around about an A2 level. The Gaelic that I've studied, though, after 1 year of Gaelic, I can say much less than I can say in Estonian after 2 weeks. And I don't know what I don't know what that says more about. I have no regrets about my year of doing Gaelic and being where I am with it. I accept that what I did with Gaelic actually I found enlightening as an experience in and of itself. So I definitely got to a point where I saw this was happening and I reevaluated the reasons for learning it, and decided that I was going to buy into what the teacher wanted to teach us, what was important to the teacher, because that was the contact I had. And with Cornish, I bought into what the teacher wanted as well, and I went for it, and I did the exam. And I again, I really am glad that I did it with Cornish. For Estonian, though, to get to this point after 2 weeks, knowing that I've just done a year of these other two languages and having that feeling of a comparative level in my ability to communicate is a little bit scary, and it makes me wonder. We have this thing where they say learn a language 5 times faster. I think they are onto something with the way that they present the language, and I think the thing that they've really got going well is that they focus on the vocabulary you actually need. Now, I'm not going to lie, there are certain vocabulary words that I need that I don't get from Speakerly, and I'm probably never going to get out of Speakerly. And so to say where I live, for example, they don't have Macedonian as a language, doesn't exist in the app at the moment. So for me, I don't think it ever will come up. So I did learn that outside of the app, but there's only a couple of words like that. Otherwise, I've really been sticking purely to just using the app itself. The thing it does is the sort of thing that I tell everyone to do, and that's get external, sort of material, listen to dialogues, get comprehensible input, listen to things and read things that are sort of just your level and a bit higher, so that you can follow, but it doesn't feel like you're lost, and you're getting enough out of it so that patterns and vocabularies are repeated over and over again. And that's what you get with Speakerly. You also get the option to either do it without speaking into the app or to speak in the app, which is really cool. And yeah, I mean, I've never used an app the way that I'm using Speakerly before, and I would say that when it comes to sort of learning a language, I mean, there's obviously a list of languages that they have. Yeah, I don't think I could compare it to much else, really. I think that what they do is quite unique, because the way they bring things forward, I've not seen that kind of thing happen before in apps that I've used. Tends to be just standard repetition, but what I see also are the things that I'm asked about. Sometimes they change things, and there's sentences I've never seen. So when I'm going through the app, I actually take screenshots of all of what I see in terms of the new vocabulary, because I like to write it out as well. I like to do multiple input, or I like to write things out. I like to reread things. I like to do all this kind of stuff. So when I'm doing it, I take screenshots, and I go through the screenshots, and I type it all out, and then I read it out to my Estonian teacher, and we go through all of that kind of stuff. So it's really cool. But I noticed that what happens is they will give me a sentence I've not seen before, but will use grammar that I have seen before, or vocabulary that I have seen before. So it's almost trying to get me to play with the language itself as an application, which is pretty cool. So, I mean, yeah, without this kind of just being a sort of I saw lots of people asking me about Speakerly in the comments, which is why I sort of went onto this. But it is very much the kind of thing that I would do naturally, and so I find that really having this grammar and vocab that makes sense to what you need to say, and then having the additional listening, reading, and also it gives you song suggestions. Having all of that just really helps you to sort of solidify everything. And that's kind of how I get started generally in language learning. And I've done it in a number of ways. Sometimes when languages are similar to languages I already speak, I can cut a few steps out of the process. So for example, when I learned Serbian, I just started watching TV because I could already understand it. And I used to watch TV and listen to Serbian and read subtitles. I could already read it. It was very easy to read and stuff. So that was simple. It was really easy. Similar thing with languages like Dutch. I didn't really take very long in learning Dutch to start, because I already spoke English, French, and German, and so I just sort of read through a book, a basic book on Dutch, and then I started reading the TV, and I read the TV every day for hours. And that's how I really picked up a lot of Dutch. And then I was speaking it actively at work and out in the town as well, because I was living in the Netherlands. So there are a number of languages like that where I've definitely had slightly different ways and techniques of learning. If you are living in a country and you want to learn a language, but you're finding it hard to practice, my top tip is to go and join a club or a class and use the language to do something else, because that's how you make friends who will speak the language. And it's not this unbalanced sort of, you're meeting somebody who wants to learn your language and they may just end up dominating you by practicing your language. This typically happens to English speakers, unfortunately. But yeah. Let me see now if there are any questions. I hope that I sort of gave you a bit of an insight into my sort of world. But these are the kinds of things I find useful. Focus is really important, and doing it regularly. I mean, I can't stress this enough. I've definitely had people come to me and say, well, I want to learn, teach me a language. I cannot teach anyone a language, and no one can. You can learn a language, and I can guide people in how to learn a language, but I can't teach anybody a language, because I can't make anybody learn. If you come to me and you have like a lesson a week or 2 lessons a week of a language, but you do nothing in between, the progress is going to be so slow. You're going to probably get frustrated. I'm going to get frustrated, like any teacher would. And you're like, well, what's the point of this? What are we doing? If you don't study, or at least have the language present in your life pretty much on a daily basis, I mean, it's not going to magically appear in your head. If it's not a case of, if you think hard enough, it's going to happen. It's like, if you want to go to a different country or a different city or travel somewhere, you can't imagine you're there. You have to do something actively to make it happen. You have to go to the train station, the bus station, or to the airport. You have to buy a ticket. You have to get on the mode of transport that you've chosen. You have to actually arrive there, land there, process yourself through, and then go to wherever you're going. And this is the same thing with a language. It's a journey. You have to do something actively all the way. On every step of the journey, you have to be an active participant in the process. And that is how you learn a language. I mean, some of you actually wrote that to me and said, you just have to do it. And some people wrote some very extreme ideas of, translating lots of novels or whatever else. I appreciate that's not for everyone. It might be for you, and if it is, great, and if it works, great, even better. But the one key thing is being present and doing it, and focusing on things that are important to you, and not wasting your time and energy, and therefore losing your motivation by learning lots and lots of words and things that you're never going to use, or at least not going to use for a very long time. And there we go. Okay, I'll have a look at the questions. Sorry, I did go on quite a lot there, didn't I? But I hope it was useful for you. And wow, thank you all for your messages. I'll do my best not to miss any, but there are quite a lot of them. Wow. Okay. I'll see what I can see. Okay, compliments on my beard. Thank you. I always find it very odd when people. It's very sweet, and if you're saying nice things to me, of course. But yeah, I do get very odd comments sometimes about my about things that are not to do with languages. I don't know. It's very sweet though. Thank you. Any native English speaker can help me, please. I hope somebody helps you. Let me see. I wouldn't, just to say, actually, if you're one of those people that says native speaker, I'd actually say that a speaker of the language is fine, because it doesn't need to necessarily be what you think of as a native speaker. In fact, in the UK, we don't use the term native speaker usually, especially when we're looking for people to do work. Potentially you can say native level speaker. So somebody who's learnt it to the level of a monolingual speaker of the language, which is totally possible for people. Some people don't speak the language of the country they're born in at home, and therefore don't consider it a native language. So, but they still have the same competency of somebody who was born as a monolingual. So native speaker doesn't mean very much. Also, a lot of the time, native speakers, if they're monolingual particularly, will not have the grammatical awareness or knowledge to be able to help you in your learning endeavors. Certainly when it comes to English, that's very true for a lot of people, because a lot of people don't have the grammatical structure or understanding of English as a language that would be taught. Of course, there's nothing wrong with the way they speak. What I'm saying is, for somebody learning it, to my mind, it's quite good to, if you're looking for those kinds of explanations, often it's somebody who's actually studied English, whether it's somebody who speaks it as a monolingual speaker of the language, or if they've learnt it as a second or other language. Let me see. Estudos, ok, já estuda 11 idiomas com... ok. Mais de um idioma por vez. Sim, eu tenho estudado muitas línguas ao mesmo tempo. Então, para mim agora, eu estou falando disso agora com o gaélico, também com o cornês, fazendo os dois idiomas ao mesmo tempo. Então, eu com cursos da universidade como uma escola de línguas. Então, estou fazendo isso este ano, e também com o coreano, e agora com o estômago, então, também. Sim, não faz mal, mas às vezes você tem também que pensar nisso, que se pode ser um problema também para você. Porque às vezes para a conversão na cabeça das duas gramáticas, ou do vocabulário, por exemplo, se um vocabulário muito similar. Então, isso, se um vocabulário similar é muito... pode ser difícil. E também estudar duas línguas também, isso como uma divisão do tempo que você tem. Então, isso você tem que também conta, porque você precisa realmente de ter um foco, de pensar muito, de gastar muito energia nisso. Então, para fazer isso, é realmente dividir em duas partes a concentração para os estudos. Okay, let me see if I can go and find some more. It's really nice to see you too. Thank you for all of the nice dearest moiroj. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I missed all the hellos, but if I go through the hellos in the beginning, I end up never saying anything. But I do excuse me. I do see them flashing by my screen, and it's very kind of you. Could you give me some encouragement for feeling intimidated when wanting to learn a difficult language? Yeah, I've been learning Korean since January. I had 2 months off, and I am not even anywhere near an A1 level in the language. So I've been studying languages since I was about 5. I've studied many different languages. I've studied some Chinese, some Japanese. I thought it would be a big help for me to start speaking Korean. I can't string much of anything together yet. And it's been, as I say, 6 months of me trying to sort of learn and to speak it. So if that's happening for me too, and I've been doing this for so many years, I'm not giving up. I'm just going to carry on. It's going to be a slow process. So sometimes when we talk about difficult languages, it's all to do with, you just need to be faced with it for a long time, over and over again, for it to become normal, to be able to repeat it, and for it to become automatic. It just takes a bit longer. So stick with it. if I'm going to get there with Korean, and I want to get there with Korean to at least be able to string things together to have a bit of a conversation, at least, then you can do it too. Because there's nothing particularly special about me if after so many years of learning languages, I still have the same kinds of difficulties. It's tenacity, so sticking with it and taking on the advice that I gave about sticking with things that you really need to know and realizing that you need to make a lot of mistakes before you get it right. I hope that helps. Let's see. Did I get a textbook for learning Mandarin Chinese where one of the dialogues has English names? Oh, no, they had Chinese names. I used, for Chinese, I used integrated Chinese, which is what we used at university in Sweden. And they were all Chinese names, I believe, except for the foreigners. They had like names like Michael, Mike, but otherwise, no. Okay, let me see. The best way to learn a language at home, I'd say what I've said really during this whole sort of live. It's focusing on what you need and doing it regularly and creating an environment. So find things that you're interested in as well. But if you know if you're not on Speakly and the language that you want isn't on Speakly yet, you want to use it, sort of any other things, I would say surround yourself with as much as possible. Find community. Community is really important. For me, I think that I went through a period of a couple of months where I had a difficult time and I couldn't really commit to my studies. So I had to just write 2 months off this year. And then when I came back to it, I went on Clubhouse and I found a study group. And I think if it weren't for that study group, I possibly wouldn't be still with Korean at this moment in time. So community, friends, learning, support groups, really important. And that's why I always say definitely they become, and this is why I like classes so much, because often they will become my support group for learning. Struggling with Russian, okay. The basics, okay, but yeah, actually, Russian is one of the languages on Speakly, so you might want to check it out. And I can recommend. I mean, even though I've not finished this month yet, I mean, I'm not going to hold back and say, "Oh no, I'm going to wait until." I can recommend Speakly for sure. I mean, it's working really, really well for me. They had a couple of technical glitches that some people wrote about, and I experienced a couple, but that's all been fixed now for a few weeks. They did a big upgrade to the system, and so I can definitely recommend it. So, and they gave me some codes when I started this. They gave me some codes for like 40% off. I'm not on commission. I don't get any money from these codes, but if it saves you some money and you like it too, then I hope you enjoy it and you do well with your Russian. I'm definitely, you'll see at the end of my Estonian thing. I mean, I did a live thing at the end of the first week. My plan was to do a live chat again on Friday, but unfortunately I had an appointment that ran over way more than was expected. So I will be doing another conversation on Tuesday, hopefully. And I'll put that out there so that you can see where I am with my Estonian. I'm definitely way more confident with the structures that I've been learning now. Now it's been like 2 weeks. I've been doing it for enough days for it to become more and more automatic. Tudo bem, obrigado. Tudo bem com você também? Let me see. Oi, oi, hello. It's the same in Farsi, yes. So let's see. Okay. So, wow, thank you so much. Speakly is possible, yeah, you can do it. So I'd try it out. I mean, as I say, I've been very happy with it for 2.5 weeks. I've been very happy with it. well, 2.5 weeks roughly. Okay, trying to get through the questions. Let me see. ¿Alguna vez has estudiado español para aprender línguas? It's so weird. I was reading Portuguese and then I started reading Spanish like it was Portuguese. That's so funny. Okay, ¿alguna vez has usado español para aprender lengua y lo recomiendo? Sí, sí, también he usado, sí, para aprender varios idiomas para usar realmente solamente para leer las cosas porque me gustan leer, me gustan los diálogos que utilizo. Así que funciona bastante bien para mí. Lo de las traducciones no me gusta tanto. Eso es algo que hace mucho Luca Lampariello, que me parece que depende de la persona también, la personalidad, pero eso no lo hago, no suelo hacer esto. En mi cabeza de vez en cuando, pero no así, escrito en plan así. A lo mejor, porque no, es un poco en contra de mi naturaleza, así que no lo hago. Pero si funciona es otra cosa, así que creo que funciona bien porque hay personas como Luca Lambrel que han aprendido bastante bien varios idiomas así, utilizando el método de asimil. Hello from Chester, hello, wow. Okay, I think I answered your question on here, so I may have got that right. Thank you. Alliance Française has been pretty darn good in my experience, but I agree. It's the way, with the why being the driving force. Absolutely, Laurie. Thank you so much. Yeah, Alliance Française and many institutions. I mean, I was very, very happy at Yunus Emre. The Yunus Emre Institute for Turkish was absolutely excellent, and I cannot fault it at all. I really enjoyed it. It was an introduction not just to the Turkish language, but to its people, to its culture, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would recommend the Yunus Emre Institute to anyone. I really, really loved studying there, and I would go back as well. And I don't know if I studied at any others. I did a bit of Pushkin in Spain, el Instituto Pushkin in España, in Madrid, and that was pretty good. But yeah, I didn't do much of it. But yes, those kinds of institutes can be absolutely brilliant. And I recommend doing things. I mean, I love courses. I love it. I've stayed in touch with a number of people I've met on these kinds of courses. Let me see. Hallo Richard, jetzt lerne ich Deutsch und ich habe Disziplin und schriftlich gemacht. Ich habe Erfahrungen mit 2 anderen Fremdsprachen, und zwar Englisch und Französisch. Sehr gut, sehr gut. Dann freue ich mich, wirklich. Also Spanisch ist meine Muttersprache, ja, okay. Aber ich finde es toll, dass du eigentlich Deutsch schreibst. Jetzt im Moment ist es cool. Wie hast du es geschafft? Wie habe ich es so geschafft, Deutsch zu sprechen? Also mit Vokabel, ja, okay. Ich habe es war ein bisschen komisch. Also beim Deutschland, ich habe ein Video drüber gemacht. Und ich habe so etwa so 130 Wörter pro Tag gelernt. Also richtig, also gelernt, weiß ich gar nicht, aber so ungefähr. Es hilft, dass ich Englisch als meine erste Sprache habe, weil ja Englisch und Deutsch sehr ähnlich sind. Und ich konnte auch damals Schwedisch schon ziemlich gut sprechen, und das hat mir auch geholfen, um Deutsch ein bisschen schneller zu lernen. Aber ja, ich meine, ich habe in Deutschland gelebt und ich war in einer Familie und wir haben nur Deutsch gesprochen, und das war ja für mich wirklich eine sehr große Hilfe. Ich meine, wenn man tagtäglich eine Sprache spricht und hört, und ich habe nur Fernsehen und so auf Deutsch gehabt, es war ja vor so YouTube und alles. Also deshalb hatte ich eigentlich wirklich keine Wahl. Ich musste ja entweder Deutsch sprechen oder nichts sprechen oder beim Eisdealer ein bisschen Italienisch sprechen oder so. Also sonst war es eigentlich, ja, gab's keine Wahl. Okay. Could you talk some more about your experience learning German and how you felt the experience the mental shift? Yeah, I can, of course. So with German, the German sentence structure, especially when people talk a lot about putting the verb at the end. So When that clicked in my head, I remember a feeling in my brain of like, I've got it. And from then onwards, it was never really a problem. It came very automatically for me. And I felt a shift in my head, because before that, my brain was very Latinate. I would think in Latin type style ideas and thoughts, and sort of my vocabulary as well was all very Latinate. And I would use quite sort of flowery language, because it was sort of my experience with French and Spanish, and then Italian and Portuguese as well. So I'd had a lot of focus on Latin languages, and so those Romance languages really had that part of my English brain going over here, and German just helped with Swedish balance it all out, and I felt my brain sort of shift back, which was quite a funny but very nice feeling. Laurie, thank you. You also felt Speak Estonian to be surprisingly efficient. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I'm not trying to be a poster boy for it, but I do think that it works well. I mean, there's no point me sitting here saying it doesn't. It does. It's worked well so far. I mean, the fact that I have hour-long chats and I don't use English, I speak Estonian with my italki teacher, is, I think, a pretty good indication of where I am. And I'm not talking about just like, I'm not saying very basic sentences. I'm now starting to talk about like what's going on in my world in Estonian, which is really surprising to me, because these are kind of, it's A1, I think A1 to A2 type ideas. I think because of my language experience from before, sometimes what I will do with fewer words often than kind of a learner who's learning a language the first time or second time. I think what I tend to do is I know how to be very inventive with sort of the words that I use. So sometimes it can feel like I'm speaking at a much higher level. Like my teacher, we were talking about my level, and I said, "Oh, I'm probably like an A1-ish type." That's kind of the amount I've done, because I've studied it almost like a full-time job for the last 2.5 weeks. So I mean, in terms of hours, I've put in quite a lot of hours for this, which would probably be the equivalent of an A1 course. Now, the thing is, it's been done in a short amount of time, so I don't know what the effect of that will be. I mean, I would not recommend most people do sort of like this 40 words a day. It's a bit of a crazy amount of words to do, but you could do a surprising amount actually with 700 or so words. You can, in terms of talking about things that you do and things that are going on, and the way it teaches you the words, they do tend to be the words that you need to do that. So yeah. You're trying to learn Estonian, Michelle, but you worry about the cases. This is what Speakly does. It does these cases in a very natural way. I always say, don't focus on cases and declensions so much, because it can be very off-putting. Learn them in context, how you use them when you use them, and that's a more natural way of doing it. Estonian kids don't learn them until, like, as names of cases until they go to school. I mean, they just learn them because that's how you say certain things. And I would definitely recommend that technique for cases in languages generally. You can learn them in sort of as grammatical, these tables. You can do it, but I think it can be off-putting unless you're really into that kind of thing. Hoi Richard, als je een nieuwe taal leert, gebruik je dezelfde strategie voor voorbeeld? Eigenlijk niet, nee. Ik heb een beetje over gesproken, maar eigenlijk niet. Het is een beetje hetzelfde, omdat ja, ik weet bijvoorbeeld welke woorden ik wil leren. Zo. Maar ik moet zeggen dat ja, het hangt vanaf wat voor mogelijkheid je hebt. Dus een cursus of misschien dan een boekje of ja, een applicatie zoals Speakly bijvoorbeeld, dan heb ik die mogelijkheid om iets te doen. Om te spreken, lezen, schrijven en luisteren is ook afhankelijk van de situatie. Bijvoorbeeld met sommige talen dan kan ik wel groepen vinden waarbij ik de talen kan oefenen of zo. En andere talen kan ik helemaal niet oefenen. Want ik zit hier in Macedonië. Dan heb ik überhaupt geen mogelijkheid om de taal te gebruiken. Dan verzoek ik dan altijd iets op internet te vinden of zo. Misschien op YouTube of en die soort dingen doe ik wel. En dan om te lezen, internet, dat is een grote hulp voor die soort dingen. Maar het is altijd afhankelijk van de situatie eigenlijk. Ja. Maar ik zoek alles uit wat ik eigenlijk wat ik kan gebruiken voor mijn talen. Ben je Portugees-talig in Nederlands geleerd? Oké, sorry, even kijken. Afhankelijk precies. Oké, geweldig. Ik zie zo, het dialoog daar in het Nederlands, moeilijk hè. Even kijken. Sorry, it's a little bit hard for me to find. I'm going through this is my problem. I go through my thoughts in different languages sometimes if I'm reading something. Talking to myself, teacher technique. Okay. Talking to yourself, teacher technique, Polyglot Traveler is definitely, it's cool because you get to practice as well. You just say things that you want to say, you practice the things that are important to you. Okay, tá bom. Okay. Oh, unfortunately, Elliot, I don't speak Vietnamese. I understand what you've written there, but I don't speak it. And I can't read it very well. My accent would be terrible. My pronunciation would be even worse. Well, both would be terrible. Lady Nim, thank you. I'm very glad that you enjoy these videos. I'm glad that you enjoy them. Thank you very much for commenting. Do I have any tips for learning German word order? Focus on it. So when you go through German, you write out phrases and things, and you see things written and it stands out, make sure you pay attention to where it's come. Try repeating it back and try substituting words in and out so that you get the practice. I think that's really, really important. It just takes time. It does take time. It does get to a point where it clicks, though. It really does. If you do a lot of that sort of lots of different sentences, you find that it starts to become normal. Okay. How much do I translate English in my head? I don't. I've never used English in my head as a translation. I just don't do it because I can't. I'm not clever enough to translate that quickly. I'm definitely not clever enough to do that. I would find that very, very difficult. I tend to, what I do is I don't think in any language particularly. I think in just thoughts and feelings and ideas and concepts, and then I attribute a language to the public. So when I'm speaking, so that's kind of what I tend to do. If I don't have the words, then maybe I might have to go to another language. Of course, if I don't have the words, I don't have the words. But I don't tend to go through a language to a language to get there. Sometimes there might be some interference if words sound similar or are the same or similar in other languages. But generally, my brain tends to separate them out. And so, for example, when I'm trying to speak Estonian now, even though it's been 2.5 weeks, I do my utmost and don't I just stick to the Estonian that I'm trying to say. And then if I realize I can't say it, then of course the English comes very quickly afterwards, but I have to think about the English of what I wanted to say after that as a separate thing, if that makes sense. It's not like I'm thinking in English what I want to say and then I say it in another language. That doesn't happen. Not quick enough, unfortunately. Definitely not fast enough for that kind of thing. What do you think learning classical Arabic, not Fusha? It's rare to find a teacher for it. Yes, Farouk. I guess it is. Would be extremely fascinating. I mean, one day I'd love to do one of those courses, where you learn how to sort of those beautiful pictures that you make with the Arabic script. I think it's so pretty. I love it. Okay. Trying to get to I'm glad that you've been enjoying this. Thank you very much for the feedback. Türkçe'nin Yunus Emre Enstitüsü'nde öğreniyoruz. Evet, öğrendim. Orada öğrendim. Evet. Ve ben 1'e kadar yaptım. Ve bundan sonra hiçbir B2 için hiçbir kurs yoktu. Ve bu yüzden artık sadece burada Üsküp'te Türkçe konuşuyorum. Ama evet, ben burada Üsküp'te Yunus Emre Enstitüsü'nde öğrendim. 1,5 yıldır. Evet. Wie kann man 100 neue Worte pro Tag lernen? Okay, das ist vielleicht, ja, es klingt ein bisschen unmöglich, aber wenn man dran denkt, wie man die Worte zusammenbauen kann, zum Beispiel wie auf Deutsch, es ist nicht so unmöglich, wie es so aussieht. Also man hat ja schon Hilfe, wenn man schon Französisch, Englisch und Schwedisch spricht und dann Deutsch lernt. Dann hat man schon andere Worte, die man schon verstehen kann. Ne? Und dadurch habe ich das eigentlich gemacht. Ja, zum Beispiel auf Englisch, also Finger, Finger, Hand, Hand, Arm, Arm, Ellenbogen, Elbow, Schulter, Shoulder. Das ist Nase, Nose, die sind sehr, es ist eigentlich kein Problem, du kannst es sehr schnell lernen, weil die eigentlich sind alle gleich, ne? So wie auf Englisch. Aber ja, so war es für mich eigentlich, dass ich so viele Worte so gelernt habe. Ja. Okay. Tere. Okay. Just come on to have a language speaking. Yes. C'est une manière d'apprendre une nouvelle langue et d'apprendre déjà une langue, car le fait de se mettre à apprendre renforce la zone du cerveau responsable pour l'apprentissage des langues. Oui, c'est vrai. Oui, je suis d'accord. How do you build up the habit of writing in the language every day? Sometimes I don't, so I don't necessarily do it every day. With Estonian, what I do is I have missed a day with Estonian where I've taken the screenshots, and then the following day I've done it. So I missed a day of doing that yesterday because I was so tired yesterday after a very crazy day on Friday, and so what I've done is I've kept those words, and after this live, I will start doing my writing. But I just use that as part of my learning. It's part of my thing that I do. Just write them out. I find it helps me to connect the words to the written words, and it helps me to visualize them. Sometimes I also find things that help me to remember the hooks, the memory hooks. So sometimes that really helps. So that's kind of why I do it. And sometimes then you also see words that are similar. For example, in Estonian, for example, there are many German words that really help me to learn vocabulary faster. So you have words like rand, which is the word for a beach in Estonian, and in German, it's a German word. It's just you wouldn't necessarily recognize it as a German word unless you were looking for it, because what they do in Estonian is they take off the S's or the STs in German. So Strand becomes Rand in Estonian. And you get a lot of words like that in Estonian, especially things to do with the house, things to do with food, things to do with sort of base stuff. You also get a number of other Indo-European influences in the language as well. You then also get words that are the same as a language I already know, but with a different meaning. So, for example, I learned the word today, vale. I'm finding it hard to pronounce it as an Estonian word now because of speaking so many different languages in this, and it's a new language for me. But vale in Spanish means okay, and vale in Estonian means wrong. So I associate the two words together by saying a Spanish person that says it's okay in Estonia is wrong, if that makes sense. This is kind of how my mind works. I make these associations between languages I already know, and it helps me to build a story and make them more memorable. So yeah, this is kind of how it goes in my head. It's a bit weird, but yeah, it's kind of it's kind of how it works. And there are lots of things like that I do that just help me to remember.
the Estonian words. Otherwise, yeah, there are loads of words from these languages. Yeah, and then a similar thing's been for all our languages, really, that I've studied. Pretty much, I find these connections. So the more languages I study, the more connections I find, and they build out from each other. So this is how it kind of grows. And when people ask me, well, will you stop learning languages? I'm like, well, no, because when I learn a new language, I find these really cool connections. Like learning Cornish made me realize a connection between words I didn't even know were connected. So I didn't know that bijou in French, which is a gem, is actually from Breton, and the word exists in Welsh and in Cornish too, which is bis for finger, because it was a ring that you put on with a gem, and it became bijou in French. It changed meaning slightly, but it's related to the word, the original word from Breton. And then the word bijou in English also exists, and it's used for kind of a small, we talk about a bijou apartment, and it means if you want to sell something and make it sound cute, it's small, but you don't want to say small because small sounds bad. You say it's a bijou apartment or a bijou a flat or whatever you want to say. It means it's small. So bijou is small because it's a small gem. It's also small because it's a thing on your finger, like a gem ring on your finger that you wear from Breton. Who knew? I love these things, and I keep doing this because I find out more and more of these things. What do you think about Irish? Yeah, I'd love to learn Irish as well at some point. At the moment, I think it might be a bit confusing learning it with Gaelic at the same time. But yeah, I'd love to. Why not? I learned that the word galore is from Gaelic, for example. I didn't know that. I learned that because I've been learning Gaelic. I had no idea. Galore, Kirst galore. Yeah, it's galore. I love it. Is talking to yourself in target language as a good active study method? Sometimes, yes. The conversation can get a bit boring. What you can do sometimes when you talk to yourself is you can get yourself into that space where you think you're getting really, really good, but because you're never ever testing yourself and you're only talking to yourself, you know what you're saying all the time, if that makes sense. So it's good to have that sort of outside influence, but it's good to do it. Yeah, it's good to get the practice in. Anyway, I should really go. I better go because it's 1 hour 17 minutes. Who's going to watch this video at 1 hour 17 minutes? Oh my word! I'm so sorry. I keep going over, but you know, I do really quite like languages. So I hope you forgive me, and I hope anyone who's sat and watched this the whole way through, thank you for sticking with me. And please do write any suggestions for anything you want me to talk about in the future. I'm very, very happy to take ideas, work with them, mold them as I did this week, and talk about things that are useful for you, because this is why I'm here, to sort of give you something that's hopefully useful, encouraging, and motivating, and to get us all learning these lovely, lovely languages. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care. Happy language learning.